In the frozen north of America, where snow buries the streets and the wind cuts like a blade, a Navy SEAL in his digital camouflage Navy working uniform walks through the storm with his loyal German shepherd at his side. No home, no destination, only discipline, instinct, and a promise between man and dog. Then, a single cry for help breaks the night. An elderly woman trapped outside an old winter bakery. One rescue, one ringing bell in the snow, and a legacy no one expected waiting behind a frozen door. If you believe kindness can still survive the coldest storms, stay with us to the end. Subscribe now for more unforgettable Navy SEAL rescue dog stories. Duluth, Minnesota sat on the edge of Lake Superior like a stubborn old watchman, shoulders squared against the continent's coldest breath. In winter, the city didn't simply get snow, it wore it, layer upon layer, until rooftops looked sugar-dusted and the streets became pale corridors of light. Even under a clear sky, the air could bite, clean and metallic, carrying the lake's sharp scent and the faint tang of pine. That morning, the world was bright in a hard, unforgiving way, as if the sun had been polished just to mock anyone who still felt weak. Wind pushed across the harbor and funneled between brick buildings, lifting loose powder into little ghost dances that skittered across sidewalks and vanished before they could be admired. It was beautiful, yes, mythic even, but it was the kind of beauty that demanded payment in numb fingers and short breaths. Ryan Walker paid in silence. He moved along the main road with the steady pace of a man trained to keep going even when his body argued. 35, broad-shouldered and built like someone who had once carried other people's fear on his back, Ryan wore his Navy working uniform the way some men wore regret, all the time, even when it wasn't necessary. The digital camouflage ran unbroken across his jacket, front placket, chest, pocket flaps, everything. No solid color panels anywhere, as strict as a rule and as comforting as a ritual. The fabric looked out of place among winter coats and wool scarves, but he didn't seem to notice. His face was angular, the kind of face that had been carved by wind and decision, a square jaw with dark stubble that never fully disappeared, cheekbones sharp enough to catch the light, and eyes a gray-blue that held a tired focus. Those eyes had learned long ago that watching the world was sometimes the only way to stay alive. Something had happened to him, something not easily named, that had taught his mouth to rest in a straight line, neither smiling nor frowning, as if emotion was a luxury he could no longer afford. Beside him trotted Ghost, and the dog was the one thing in Ryan's orbit that still looked like certainty. Ghost was a German shepherd, 6 years old, large and powerfully built, with a thick coat that told its own story of winters survived. A dark sable body washed in deep brown, legs and belly shaded tan, and a heavy black overlay across his back and neck, so dark it looked like spilled ink. There was no silver, no gray sheen, no unnatural shine. Just dense, natural fur that drank the cold and kept moving. His ears stayed alert, swiveling like radar dishes catching whispers. His amber eyes were bright and intelligent, and they watched not only the street but Ryan, as if measuring the distance between the man's bones and his will. Ghost walked close enough that their shadows almost merged on the snow, two figures stitched together by loyalty and necessity. Ryan had no home to return to, no warm kitchen waiting, no one expecting him to knock. He had drifted into Duluth weeks ago, chasing the kind of work that didn't ask questions, shoveling, repairs, hauling, anything honest that might buy a meal and a place to sleep that wasn't a bench. But the winter economy had its own cruelty. Everyone needed help, and everyone also needed to trust you enough to hand you a key. Trust was slow. Hunger was fast. Ghost never complained. He simply stayed near, the way a guardian spirit might stay near a fallen hero, waiting for him to remember what he was still capable of. As the wind sharpened, Ryan angled toward a side street lined with older storefronts. Most were dark, windows frosted over or boarded, signs faded like tired prayers. Then he saw it, a warm square of light spilling onto the snow, soft and gold, as if someone had cut a hole into the afternoon and let summer leak out. Above the door hung a sign shaped like a bell, painted in worn navy and cream, Harbor Bell Bakery. The letters were old but proud, the kind of handwriting a person chose when they wanted a place to feel friendly. Ryan slowed, not because he suddenly became hopeful. Hope had been rationed out of him long ago, but because warmth had gravity. Ghost's nose lifted, inhaling. The dog's expression changed in that subtle way animals had, the way a wolf might look when it caught the scent of something important. Cinnamon, perhaps, and yeast, and the faint sweetness of butter. A bakery smelled like shelter, even if you never stepped inside. Ryan muttered to himself, half a joke, half a wish. If they've got coffee, we might live through the day. He took one step closer, boots crunching on the snow. That was when the bell rang, 3 clear chimes, crisp as ice snapping on the lake. Ding, ding, ding. Ryan stopped. The door hadn't moved. No shadow crossed the frosted glass. Wind gusted, yes, but the bell's rhythm sounded deliberate, as if someone had tapped it with a careful finger. Ghost froze so suddenly, his paws seemed nailed to the ground. His ears shot forward, tail low, body tensed. Then he gave a short, urgent bark, not playful, not social, but a signal bark, the kind used when a situation had teeth. Ryan's chest tightened with an old instinct that didn't belong to civilian life. Easy, he said, voice calm by habit. Probably just... The world answered him with a crack. Not thunder. Not a car backfiring. A sharp, splitting sound like wood breaking under pressure. Ryan's gaze snapped left. A pine tree near the curb. Tall, heavy with snow, was splitting along a jagged seam. The top swayed, slow at first, then faster, as if the storm had finally decided to collect its debt. On the bakery's porch stood an elderly woman fighting with a wooden shutter. She was small but sturdy, bundled in a long wool coat the color of charcoal. A knit hat clung to her head, and wisps of white hair escaped, plastering to her cheeks. She moved with determination, bracing herself against the wind, her posture proud in a way that made her seem taller than she was. Margaret Maggie Collins, 78, was the kind of woman who had probably lived through more winters than most people had excuses. Her face, visible beneath the hat, carried deep lines etched by laughter and worry in equal measure. Behind fogged glasses, her eyes were a bright, sharp blue, watchful, unimpressed by drama, the eyes of someone who had run a business and a life without waiting for anyone's permission. Ryan didn't know her name yet. He only saw a human being in the wrong place at the wrong second. "Ma'am," he shouted, voice cutting through the wind. "Move!" She turned, startled, hands still gripping the shutter. For a fraction of a heartbeat, her mouth formed a word. Maybe what? Maybe who? And then the pine came down. It wasn't graceful. It was an execution. The trunk slammed onto the porch edge with a brutal thud, splintering railing, cracking a support beam, and throwing a burst of snow into the air like a white explosion. Maggie disappeared behind the falling branches. Ryan ran before his brain finished thinking. His boots skidded, then found purchase. He vaulted the curb and hit the porch area as debris settled. Ghost surged with him, not ahead, not behind. Beside, as if they were still on a mission. Ryan dropped to his knees, hands already searching for leverage points like he'd done 1,000 times with collapsed walls and twisted metal. He found a heavy branch pinning a section of railing. Beneath it, Maggie's leg was trapped. She was conscious, coughing, trying to pull free with stubborn strength that would have impressed any god of war. Ryan spoke like he spoke to frightened teammates, steady, simple. "Don't move, I've got you." Maggie's eyes flashed behind her glasses. "You better," she rasped, and even then the humor showed up, a spark in the storm. Ghost barked once, then pressed his shoulder against Ryan's thigh, bracing him the way a partner might. Ryan used the wreckage like a puzzle. He slid a broken plank under the branch as a wedge, shifting weight bit by bit. His muscles strained beneath the uniform, his jaw clenched, breath steamed out in hard bursts. The branch creaked, reluctant, then lifted enough for Maggie to yank her leg free. Ryan hooked an arm under her shoulders. She was lighter than he expected, all bones and resilience. Together, man and dog guided her through the scattered debris toward the bakery door. Ryan shoved it open with his hip, and warmth hit them like a blessing. The air inside smelled of cinnamon and yeast, and something sweet that felt almost like memory. Light glowed from hanging fixtures, reflecting off glass jars and metal pans. Flour dust drifted in the air, catching the sunlight that slipped through the front windows, turning the inside of the bakery into a bright golden pocket carved out of winter. Maggie's boots left wet prints on the floorboards. Ryan helped her sit on a chair near the counter. She touched her temple, fingers coming away with a smear of blood. Not much, but enough to remind the room that the storm had teeth. Ryan reached into his pack for a clean cloth. His hands were steady, practiced. Maggie watched him with those sharp blue eyes, as if deciding what kind of man he was. "You military?" she asked, voice shaky but not weak. Ryan nodded, tying the cloth gently. "Was. And that dog," she added, glancing at Ghost. "He looks like he's judging me." Ghost stood close, head lifted, amber eyes fixed not on Maggie but on the bakery itself, as if he couldn't stop listening. Maggie's mouth twitched. "Fine, judge away. I've been judged by better." Ryan almost smiled, a small crack in the stone of his expression. "He only barks like that when something matters." "Well," Maggie said, wincing as he tightened the cloth, "if that bell dragged you here, maybe it knows what matters." Ryan looked toward the door. The small silver bell above it hung from a wooden arch. Its surface was etched with tiny pine branch patterns, delicate and old. It swayed slightly, though the door had already shut and the wind outside was muffled by the walls. The bakery felt oddly still, as if it were holding its breath. Ghost's gaze snapped to the back corner near the brick oven. His fur along the shoulders rose, not in aggression, but in alertness. He took 2 steps, then stopped, rigid, staring at the floorboards beside the oven like he could see through wood and time. Ryan followed the dog's line of sight and felt a faint prickle at the base of his neck, an instinct he'd hoped to leave behind with the war. Maggie noticed. Her voice lowered. "He do that often?" "Not for nothing," Ryan said quietly. Maggie's eyes flicked to that corner, and for the first time her humor faded into something older, more cautious. "That part of the floor," she murmured, "always sounded off when the weather turns." Ryan crouched, listening. The bakery's warmth hummed around them. Pipes ticked softly. Outside, the city's winter brightness pressed against the windows. Then the bell above the door rang again, one long, slow chime, drawn out like a warning sung by a distant god. Maggie stiffened. Ryan turned sharply. The door hadn't moved. No one stood outside. Ghost didn't look at the bell. He kept staring at the oven corner, ears pricked, body taut, as if the sound had come from beneath their feet rather than above the door. For a heartbeat, the bakery felt less like a shop and more like a threshold, between cold and warmth, between past and future, between the living and the stories that refused to stay buried. Ryan swallowed, eyes narrowing. "Okay," he whispered to Ghost, attempting a humor that came out thin. "What did you hear?" Ghost didn't blink. He simply held his stare, as if something under the floor had just exhaled. The warmth inside Harbor Bell Bakery settled slowly, like a living thing relearning how to breathe after fear. Light poured through the tall front windows in clean winter sheets, bright and honest, scattering across the wooden floor and catching the flour dust still drifting in the air. Each particle shimmered briefly before settling, as if even the dust needed a moment to remember it was safe. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but here it softened, reduced to a pale glow pressed against the glass. Ryan helped Maggie Collins sit at the small table near the counter, the one with a chipped edge and a faded blue cloth that had likely been washed 1,000 times. Up close, she looked even smaller, but no less solid. Her wool coat hung open now, revealing a thick gray sweater knitted tight enough to hold its shape against decades of use. Maggie's hands were gnarled, fingers slightly bent, the hands of a woman who had kneaded dough and carried trays long after others would have asked for help. Her white hair, pulled loosely back, escaped in wisps around her temples, and her pale skin bore the mottled honesty of age. Ryan wrapped the cloth around the shallow cut on her temple with the same precision he once used on wounded teammates. Maggie watched him, eyes sharp behind her fogging glasses, then snorted softly. "You lift wood like you're lifting destiny itself," she said, voice rough but amused. Ryan exhaled through his nose, tightening the knot. "I've lifted heavier things than trees," he replied, the words flat but not unkind. Something flickered in Maggie's gaze, recognition perhaps, or the instinct of someone who knew pain when she heard it. She waved the moment away. "Coffee," she declared. "Before I pass out? Or you do?" She stood on her own, stubborn as a pillar, and moved behind the counter with a practiced limp. Ryan hovered, ready to help, but she shot him a look that had ended arguments for decades. "I said coffee, not a rescue operation." He stepped back, almost smiling. The coffee came from a dented metal pot that looked older than both of them combined. Maggie poured with steady hands, the dark liquid steaming in thick white curls. She slid a mug toward Ryan, then glanced down at Ghost. The German shepherd sat close to Ryan's leg, his large frame coiled but calm, black overlay dark against the honeyed light. His amber eyes tracked every movement Maggie made, not aggressively, but with an intensity that suggested he was cataloging the world for threats and truths alike. "And for the officer here," Maggie said, opening a low cabinet. She produced a waffle, still warm, its surface golden and fragrant. Butter melted into the grooves almost instantly. Ghost's ears flicked. Maggie crouched with a grunt and placed the waffle on a plate, breaking off a corner. "Don't worry," she muttered. "I don't poison heroes." Ghost sniffed once, then accepted the offering with dignified restraint. The smell of cinnamon and butter spread through the bakery, pushing the last hint of wet snow out of the room. Ryan wrapped his hands around the mug, feeling warmth seep into his palms, then into his bones. He hadn't realized how cold he was until that moment. He took a sip. The coffee was strong, slightly bitter, and perfect. Maggie leaned against the counter, watching him. "You passing through?" she asked casually, though the question carried weight. Ryan shrugged. "Seems to be my specialty?" Maggie nodded, as if that answered more than he'd said. Ryan's gaze wandered while they ate. In daylight, the bakery revealed its age honestly. The ceiling bore faint water stains where the roof had surrendered in small ways over the years. One corner sagged just enough to be noticeable if you knew how to look. The electrical conduit running along the wall was old, paint-chipped, its insulation brittle. The floorboards beneath the oven were darker, worn smooth by decades of heat and foot traffic, and when Maggie shifted her weight, they answered with a low creak that sounded too deep for comfort. And yet, despite all of it, the place felt alive, warm, like a home that had decided to keep going even when the world told it to stop. Ghost rose suddenly and walked toward the oven. He lowered his head, sniffing the seam where floor met brick, then scratched once, twice, 3 times, short, deliberate strokes. Ryan's shoulders tightened. He recognized the pattern immediately, the same alert Ghost had given in places where the ground lied. "Hey," Ryan murmured, approaching. He crouched and pressed his palm to the floorboards. They vibrated faintly under his touch, not with sound, but with a suggestion of hollowness. He pressed again, harder. Nothing moved. No latch revealed itself. Maggie watched from the counter, her humor dimming. "He's been doing that more often," she admitted. "Usually when the weather turns bad. I always figured it was mice or drafts." Ryan shook his head slowly. "Mice don't listen like that." Ghost's tail was stiff, his focus unbroken. Ryan tried to wedge his fingers between the boards, but whatever lay beneath was sealed tight. For now. He straightened, forcing his tone lighter. "Probably nothing dangerous," he said, more for Maggie than himself. "But I'll take another look later." Maggie nodded, unconvinced but trusting. She finished her coffee and sighed, the sound heavy with fatigue. "Clinic wants me in overnight," she said, as if discussing a chore. "Just to make sure my head's still attached the right way." Ryan frowned. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." "I won't be," Maggie replied, then met his eyes. "That's where you come in." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a ring of keys, metal worn smooth by time. They clinked softly as she set them on the counter. "Watch the place for me. Couple of days. Keep the ovens warm." Ryan stared at the keys. "I don't want to impose," Maggie snorted. "Nonsense. Places like this don't impose. They invite." She slid the keys closer. "Besides, I trust dogs. And he trusts you." Ghost glanced back at Ryan, as if on cue. Maggie's expression softened. "If the bell rings on its own," she added quietly, "open the door." Ryan looked toward the silver bell above the entrance. In the daylight, it seemed ordinary, small, slightly tarnished, its pine-etched surface catching the sun. "That happens?" he asked. Maggie's mouth curved into a faint smile. "More than you'd think. Sometimes people don't knock. Sometimes they don't know they're knocking." Ryan absorbed that, the way he absorbed instructions that didn't come with explanations. He nodded once. "All right." Maggie squeezed his forearm, her grip stronger than expected. "Good. Feed yourself. Feed the dog. Don't let the place go cold." She grabbed her coat and hat, then paused at the door. "Ryan," she said, testing his name like she'd known it longer than an hour. "Whatever you're running from, this place doesn't care." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the bakery wrapped in light and quiet. That night, after Ryan locked up, he rolled out his sleeping bag near the counter. The bakery creaked as it cooled, the familiar sounds of an old building settling into itself. Ghost lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The smell of bread lingered faintly in the air, mixed with wood and coffee. For the first time in weeks, Ryan's body relaxed enough to sleep. The sound woke him an hour later. A faint scrape, metal against stone. Ryan's eyes snapped open. Ghost was already on his feet, a low, controlled growl vibrating in his chest. Not fear, but warning. The sound came again, slow and deliberate, from beneath the floor near the oven. Ryan sat up, heart steady but awake in that old, familiar way. He listened, counting breaths. The bakery held its warmth, its light, its silence, except for that sound, patient and waiting, as if something below was testing whether the night was watching back. Morning came to Duluth the way it always did in winter, quiet, bright, and unforgiving. The sun rose pale over Lake Superior, turning the frozen surface into a sheet of dull silver, while snow along the streets reflected light so clean it almost hurt the eyes. Harbor Bell Bakery woke slowly. Ryan unlocked the door just after dawn, his breath fogging the glass as he stepped inside, Ghost at his side, paws silent on the wooden floor. The bakery greeted them with cold that hadn't yet surrendered to the ovens, a chill that crept up from the floorboards and reminded Ryan he was still sleeping in borrowed places. He shrugged off his jacket, revealing the uninterrupted digital camouflage of his Navy working uniform beneath, sleeves already worn soft at the cuffs, and set about lighting the ovens the way Maggie had shown him the night before. As warmth spread, flour dust rose again, catching the morning light and turning the air into something almost holy. The bell above the door rang sharply. Ryan looked up, instinct tightening his shoulders, but this time the door actually opened. A girl stepped in, stamping snow from her boots. She couldn't have been more than 17, small, quick, and bright in the way youth often was when it hadn't yet been dulled by disappointment. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a tight ponytail that swung as she moved, and her cheeks were flushed red from the cold. She wore a thick parka over a faded apron already dusted with flour, as if she'd put it on before even stepping inside. Her eyes, a warm hazel, took in the bakery in one sweeping glance, sharp and curious. "You must be the serious soldier," she said, voice light and teasing. "Maggie said you'd look like you were guarding a bunker, not a bakery." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "Ryan," he said. She grinned and held out a hand dusted white. "Emily Parker. I help out here before school. Maggie didn't answer her phone, so I figured I'd check." Her grip was firm, confident, like someone used to carrying trays and opinions. Ghost sniffed her cautiously. Emily crouched without hesitation, smiling at him. "And you must be the scary one," she said. Ghost's ears flicked, and after a moment, he allowed her to scratch behind his neck. Ryan watched the tension ease from the dog's shoulders. Emily straightened, nodding toward the ovens. "So," she said, clapping her hands once, "you ready to bake? Or are you planning to interrogate the dough first?" Ryan huffed a quiet laugh before he could stop himself. They worked together easily. Emily moved through the bakery like it was an extension of her body, reaching for bowls without looking, measuring flour by feel rather than numbers. She talked constantly, not meaningless chatter, but stories about school, about customers who liked their rolls extra crisp, about Maggie's stubborn refusal to retire. Ryan listened more than he spoke, his hands following instructions, kneading dough with a care that surprised him. These hands had once disarmed explosives by touch alone, had learned the language of pressure and release under the threat of death. Now they folded dough, warm and forgiving, responding not with violence but with patience. The realization settled over him gently, like snow falling without wind. Ghost lay near the ovens, eyes half closed, until something changed. He rose abruptly, body stiff, and stepped between Ryan and the brick oven. He scratched the floor, once, twice, 3 times, then backed away, ears pinned forward, gaze locked on the dark seam beneath the oven's base. Emily froze. "He does that a lot?" she asked, voice lower now. Ryan wiped his hands on a towel, heart steady but alert. "Only when something's wrong." He knelt, pressing his palm against the floorboards. The vibration was clearer in daylight, a hollow echo, muted but unmistakable. "Maggie ever say anything about this spot?" Emily frowned. "She said the floor breathed when storms came in. I thought it was just her being poetic." Together, they pried at the edge of the board using a metal spatula and an old screwdriver. The wood resisted, then gave with a reluctant groan. Beneath it was a shallow cavity layered with dust and the faint scent of vanilla long absorbed into the wood. Inside sat a small tin box, dented and dull, its lid etched with faint cursive barely legible through age. Ryan lifted it carefully, as if expecting it to explode. Emily leaned closer, eyes wide. "What is that?" Ryan brushed off dust. The inscription read, "For the hands that keep the ovens warm." He opened the box. Inside were neatly folded letters tied with faded ribbon, their edges yellowed. A small notebook lay beneath them, its pages filled with looping handwriting. Emily picked up one letter and read silently, her expression shifting from curiosity to awe. "These are thank you notes," she whispered. Ryan flipped through the notebook. It wasn't just recipes, though those were there too, scrawled measurements and substitutions, but records, dates, names, notes in the margins, left extra loaves for the shelter, no charge, bell rang at dawn, gave bread to a mother and her son, didn't ask why. Emily swallowed. "She never told anyone," she said. Beneath the notebook lay a folded paper, thicker than the rest. Ryan opened it to reveal a hand-drawn diagram of electrical wiring, lines traced carefully, notes written in firm strokes. One phrase stood out: "Wire too close to gas valve, replace immediately." Ryan's jaw tightened. "This place is a fire waiting to happen," he muttered. Emily nodded slowly. "I told her the lights flickered. She said the building would tell her when it was time." They sat back on their heels, the box between them like a relic. The bakery hummed quietly around them, ovens warm, air sweet. Then the bell above the door rang once, not sharply, gently. Ryan's head snapped up. The door hadn't moved. Snow lay undisturbed outside. Ghost turned toward the entrance, tail wagging once, slow and deliberate, as if greeting someone Ryan couldn't see. Emily's breath caught. Did you see that?" Ryan didn't answer. He was watching Ghost, the way the dog's posture softened instead of stiffening, the way his ears relaxed. Whatever had rung the bell hadn't come to harm them. Yet. The sound faded, leaving the bakery wrapped in light and quiet once more. Ryan closed the tin box carefully. "We keep this safe," he said. Emily nodded, a small, serious smile replacing her usual grin. "Yeah," she said. "Feels like we just found the heart of the place." Ghost returned to his spot by the oven, lying down with his head resting near the opened floorboard, amber eyes half-lidded but watchful, as if guarding not just the bakery but the stories hidden beneath it. The bakery felt different after the bell's quiet greeting the day before, as if the walls had decided to pay closer attention to the people moving inside them. Morning light poured in again, crisp and bright, turning the snow outside into a reflective field that bounced sunlight back through the windows. Ryan stood near the counter with the tin box tucked safely beneath it, listening to the subtle hum of the ovens and the less reassuring buzz of old wiring in the walls. He didn't need instruments to tell him something was wrong. Years of listening for danger had tuned his senses to the quiet signals others ignored. He picked up the phone Maggie kept by the register and dialed the number scribbled on a scrap of paper taped to the wall. "Miller Electric," came a voice moments later, easy and awake. "This is Ethan." Ethan Miller arrived within the hour, his truck crunching over snow as he parked beside the curb. He was 32, tall and wiry with a build that suggested endurance rather than brute force. His hair was light brown and perpetually windblown, as if it refused to be tamed by hats or hands, and a short, neatly kept beard framed a face that smiled quickly and often. His eyes were a pale green, sharp with curiosity, and they missed very little. He stepped into the bakery carrying a heavy tool bag slung over one shoulder and paused, inhaling deeply. "Smells like heaven," he said. "And trouble." Ryan nodded once. Ethan noticed the uniform immediately, the uninterrupted digital camouflage standing out against flour-dusted counters. "Navy?" Ethan asked, not prying, just acknowledging. "Was," Ryan replied. Ethan didn't push. Something in his posture softened, the way people softened when they recognized a fellow traveler of hard roads. He set his tools down and got to work without ceremony. Ethan moved efficiently, opening panels, tracing lines with practiced fingers. He hummed under his breath as he worked, a habit that seemed to steady him. Emily hovered nearby, watching with interest, occasionally handing him tools when he asked. "You always hum?" she asked. Ethan grinned. "Picked it up after my first house fire call. Silence makes people panic. Noise reminds them someone's doing something." Ryan watched closely as Ethan pulled back insulation near the oven. The wire beneath was blackened, brittle, its casing cracked. "This," Ethan said, tapping it gently, "is a miracle waiting to stop being one. One surge, one spark, and this whole place goes up faster than a Christmas tree." He replaced the damaged section with new wire, securing it properly away from the gas valve. When he finished, the hum in the walls quieted, replaced by a steady, reassuring silence. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "You caught this just in time." "Didn't catch it," Ryan said. "My dog did." Ethan glanced at Ghost, who sat watching with his usual alert calm. "Smart dog," he said appreciatively. "Those are my favorite kind." After Ethan left, Emily set a small glass jar on the counter, its lid polished clean. She taped a handwritten label to it, "Promise Loaf." "Hear me out," she said, bouncing slightly on her heels. "Anyone who needs bread can take one. Anyone who can help leaves a promise instead of money, a favor, a kindness. Maggie would love it." Ryan considered the jar, the simplicity of it. He nodded. "Do it." Outside, the snow continued to fall, but the sky stayed clear. Sunlight glinting off the street so brightly it felt like walking through a dream. Ryan stepped behind the bakery after closing to check the area near the oven vent, Ghost following close. As he cleared debris, Ghost stopped abruptly. His posture changed, muscles tightening, ears pricked. He sniffed, then pawed at a dark corner behind the brickwork. Ryan crouched and reached in, fingers closing around something soft but wrong. He pulled out a strip of cloth, damp and acrid-smelling. His stomach tightened. Chemical accelerant. Someone had tucked it deep where heat would build unnoticed. "That's not an accident," Ryan muttered. He wrapped the cloth in plastic and stood, eyes scanning the street through the side window. Across the road, framed by falling snow, stood a man in a black suit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture relaxed to the point of arrogance. His hair was jet black, slicked neatly back, untouched by snow or wind. A dark overcoat hung perfectly from his frame, expensive and tailored. Even from a distance, Ryan could see the man's face was smooth, clean-shaven, with sharp cheekbones and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man raised a hand slightly, not waving, more like acknowledging a move in a game, then turned and walked away, his shoes leaving no visible prints on the snow-dusted sidewalk. Ryan's gaze followed him until he disappeared around the corner. When Ryan returned to the front of the bakery, he found something on the threshold, a crisp business card, edges sharp against the white snow. Gavin Kincaid, Kincaid Development. Ryan stared at the name, feeling the shift in the air, the subtle change from quiet mystery to open threat. Ghost pressed against his leg, steady and warm. Ryan pocketed the card, eyes narrowing toward the bright street beyond the glass, where winter continued to pretend it was innocent. Maggie Collins returned 2 days later, smaller somehow, as if the winter had taken a quiet measure of her strength and kept a portion for itself. She leaned on a simple wooden cane now, polished smooth by years of use, and her steps were slower, but her eyes were the same, bright, unblinking blue, sharp as lake ice under morning sun. Snow clung to the hem of her charcoal coat when she stepped into Harbor Bell Bakery, and the bell chimed softly above her head. The sound felt different this time, not like a greeting, but like acknowledgement. Ryan rose from behind the counter at once. Ghost stood with him, tall and still, black overlay dark against the bakery's light. Maggie waved off concern with a small flick of her fingers. "I'm not made of glass," she said, though her breath came shallow. "Just a little thinner around the edges." She set her purse down and glanced toward the ovens, listening to their steady hum with the affection one might reserve for an old friend. "Come," she said to Ryan, "there's something we need to talk about." She led him into the back room, a narrow space that smelled of flour and old paper. The walls were lined with shelves stacked high with ledgers, recipe cards, and tin molds dulled by time. A single bulb hung overhead, casting clean light across a work table dusted white. Maggie eased herself into a chair, resting her cane against the wall. Up close, the years showed more clearly, the fine web of lines around her mouth, the faint tremor in her hands when she folded them together. Still, there was nothing fragile about her presence. She looked at Ryan the way commanders looked at soldiers when they were about to say something that would change the shape of a life. "I'm old," she said plainly. "Not dying today, but not pretending otherwise either." Ryan shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "You don't owe me explanations." Maggie smiled. "No, but I owe this place a future." She tapped the table with one knuckle. "Harbor Bell needs someone to keep the fire lit, not just the ovens, the heart." Ryan inhaled slowly. "I'm not the man you're looking for." "That's what the right ones always say," Maggie replied. "You think I don't know what kind of man walks through my door? I've fed them for 40 years, men running from ghosts, men standing between danger and others without being asked." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I'm passing through." "Passing through doesn't mean passing on," she said gently. "No one inherits kindness, Ryan. You don't take it, you carry it." He shook his head. "I don't want to take anything from you." Maggie's eyes softened. "Good. Then don't take it. Continue it." She reached into her purse and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Read this when the time comes." The time came the next morning. Winter sunlight crept across the bakery floor, bright and indifferent. Ryan woke to the sound of Emily's footsteps and then to a silence that felt wrong. Maggie did not come downstairs. The paramedics arrived with practiced efficiency, their faces kind and solemn. Maggie Collins had passed in her sleep, a faint smile still resting at the corners of her mouth, as if she'd finally finished a long day and found it good enough. Ryan stood by the counter long after they left, the envelope trembling in his hands. Ghost pressed close, a steady weight against his leg. He opened the letter with care. Maggie's handwriting was firm, even, the ink dark and sure. She thanked him for the rescue, for the patience, for listening when the bakery spoke. She wrote of the promised loaf, of bread given without question, of a bell that rang when kindness crossed the threshold. Then came the will, folded beneath the letter, official and unmistakable. Harbor Bell Bakery, its land and its recipes were to pass to Ryan Walker under one condition: the promise loaf must never stop. Ryan read it twice, then set the papers down on the flour-dusted table. The room felt too quiet. "I didn't ask for this," he said aloud. Ghost lifted his head, amber eyes steady. If the bakery had an answer, it didn't give it yet. The bell rang hard that afternoon. The door opened with a sharp rush of cold, and a woman stepped inside who looked like she belonged to a different world entirely. Trina Collins was 36, tall and sharply dressed, her posture precise and unyielding. Copper-red hair was pulled into a severe bun at the nape of her neck, every strand controlled. Her skin was pale and flawless, untouched by kitchen heat or winter labor, and her lipstick was a deep, deliberate red. A tailored coat hugged her narrow frame, the fabric expensive, the cut exact. Her eyes, dark, assessing, took in the bakery like a ledger to be balanced. "So," she said coolly, "this is the soldier." Ryan met her gaze without rising. "Ryan." "Trina Collins," she replied, as if the name itself were leverage. "Maggie's niece." Emily stiffened near the ovens. Trina's eyes flicked to her, dismissive, then back to Ryan. "I assume you've read the will." "I have." "Then you know it's nonsense," Trina snapped. "Sentimental scribbling from a woman who refused to face reality. This place is a liability. The block's been eyed for redevelopment for years." Ryan's voice stayed level. "Your aunt didn't see it that way." Trina laughed softly, without humor. "Of course she didn't. She saw what she wanted to see, a wounded veteran to feel generous toward." Ghost rose, placing himself squarely between Ryan and Trina. His low growl vibrated through the room, controlled but unmistakable. Trina took a half-step back, her composure cracking for the briefest moment before she recovered. "This isn't over," she said tightly. "I'll speak to my lawyer." She turned and left, heels clicking sharply against the floor, the bell ringing once as the door closed behind her. The bakery exhaled. Ryan rubbed his temples. I didn't come here to take someone else's life. Emily stepped forward, setting a tray of cooling loaves on the counter. You didn't take it, she said quietly. She gave it because she trusted you. Outside, dusk settled early. Snow fell in fine, steady sheets, bright under the streetlights. Ryan locked up and turned off the main lights, leaving only the glow from the ovens. Ghost paced once, then settled near the door. A sharp crack shattered the calm. Glass exploded inward from the front window, scattering shards across the floor. Ryan lunged forward, too late. Another impact followed. When the noise finally stopped, silence rushed in, heavy and cold. Ryan stepped outside. Snow was trampled near the door, and across it, sprayed in harsh black paint, were 3 words that burned against the white: sell or burn. Ghost stood beside him, body rigid, eyes fixed on the street beyond the light, as if memorizing the darkness that had dared to speak. Rumors move faster than snow in Duluth. By the morning after the shattered window, whispers had already threaded their way through the streets like a second weather system, invisible but biting. Harbor Bell Bakery was unsafe, people said. The walls were moldy. The wiring was ancient. Someone had heard the floor might collapse. Someone else swore the ovens weren't up to code. Ryan heard it all from the other side of the counter, as customers lingered, voices lowered, eyes darting toward the cracked glass now patched with plywood. He listened the way he had once listened to distant radio chatter, without reacting, without showing where it landed. Emily didn't share that restraint. She slammed a tray onto the counter hard enough to rattle the jars. "This is garbage," she snapped, cheeks flushed, ponytail swinging. "We just fixed the wiring. Ethan signed off on it. You saw the receipts." Ryan nodded, calm in a way that irritated people who wanted fire. "Anger's loud," he said. "Truth isn't." That afternoon, the inspectors arrived. 2 men in gray coats stepped through the door with clipboards held like shields. They were clean-shaven, mid-40s maybe, their hair neatly parted, their smiles practiced and thin. Neither introduced himself properly. They asked questions already answered, tapped walls with theatrical concern, peered behind appliances as if expecting monsters. Ghost followed them at a measured distance, amber eyes tracking every move. When one inspector crouched near the oven and made a show of sniffing the air, Ghost stepped closer, his presence silent but unmistakable. The man straightened quickly. "We'll be filing a report," the taller inspector said, voice smooth. "This place may need to suspend operations pending review." Emily opened her mouth, but Ryan laid a hand on her arm. "Thank you for your time," he said evenly. "We'll cooperate." After they left, the bakery felt smaller. Emily paced. "They're lying." "They're acting," Ryan replied, "and actors need an audience." The audience arrived anyway. By evening, fewer customers came through the door. Some left promises in the jar instead of money, notes folded small. "I'll shovel Mrs. Hanley's walk. I'll watch the kids next door. I'll fix the church steps." The jar filled with paper and purpose. That was when Pastor Ruth Delgado stepped inside. She moved with a quiet authority that came from being seen in moments when people were most honest. In her mid-50s, Ruth was tall and straight-backed, her shoulders relaxed as if she carried burdens without letting them bend her. Her hair, a soft silver threaded through dark curls, was cut short and practical. Her skin was warm olive, weathered by winters and compassion, and her eyes were a deep, steady brown that met yours without judgment. She wore a wool coat the color of sand and a scarf knitted by someone who loved her. She took in the bakery with a single glance, the plywood, the promised loaf jar, Ghost by the door, and nodded once. "Maggie would have liked this," she said. Ryan inclined his head. "She taught us." Ruth smiled faintly. "Then let's teach the town." She didn't waste time. Within hours, Ruth had made calls and posted notices. The next morning, the bakery opened to the sound of hammers and laughter. Neighbors arrived with toolboxes and thermoses. Someone brought ladders, someone else brought paint. The cold stayed outside. Inside, the air warmed with effort. Emily organized with the confidence of someone who had grown up helping without being asked. Ryan worked the way he always did, methodical, steady, fixing what needed fixing without announcing it. Ghost became a fixture, a dark shape moving between legs, accepting gentle pats from children who arrived wide-eyed and fearless. They stroked the black overlay along his back like touching a story made solid. "He's a hero," one boy whispered. Ghost's tail wagged once, solemnly. Days passed like that, bright with winter sun and noise. The bakery's porch became a meeting place. The promised loaf jar overflowed with folded commitments. Someone hung a hand-lettered sign by the door. Community renovation, all welcome. Then the letter came. The city's seal pressed into thick paper, the words precise and cold. Without historical documentation and proof of prior compliance, Harbor Bell Bakery would be subject to temporary closure pending investigation. Emily read it aloud, voice trembling. "They lost the papers," she said. "They didn't lose them," Ryan replied. He folded the letter carefully. "They're counting on us not finding them." Night fell early. Snow returned in fine needles, the kind that made the streetlights glow like halos. After closing, Ryan climbed to the attic to check for drafts. The attic was narrow, beams low and dark, dust floating in the cone of his flashlight. Ghost followed, paws quiet on the old boards. He paced once, twice, then stopped abruptly near the far wall. His posture changed. He lifted a paw and scraped. 3 short scratches, paused, then 3 more, deliberate and precise. Ryan's breath stilled. He knew that signal. Ghost pressed his nose to the bricks, whining softly, then looked back at Ryan with an intensity that felt like instruction. Ryan crouched and examined the wall. One brick was slightly misaligned, mortar crumbling around its edges. He pried gently with a screwdriver. The brick came loose, releasing a breath of dust and cold air. Inside the hollow space sat a small wooden box, darkened with age. Ryan lifted it free, heart steady, mind racing. Whatever Maggie had hidden, she'd trusted the building to keep until the right hands found it. Ghost sat back on his haunches, eyes fixed on the box, tail thumping once, as if to say, "Here." Ryan knelt in the attic with the wooden box resting on his thighs, dust drifting around him like the memory of old winters. The box was heavier than it looked, its corners reinforced with iron brackets dulled by age. Maggie had chosen good wood. Oak, dense and patient. When he opened it, the smell of paper and dry cedar rose up, clean and unmistakable. Inside were neatly stacked documents bound with twine, city permits stamped and dated, fire safety certificates renewed year after year, inspection approvals signed by names that still meant something at City Hall. There were receipts too, yellowed but legible, showing legitimate electrical upgrades and gas line adjustments paid for in cash. Maggie had saved one careful dollar at a time. At the bottom lay a handwritten note in Maggie's steady script. "For the one who listens when the building speaks, these papers will keep the door open." Ryan exhaled slowly. A weight lifting that he hadn't realized was pressing on his chest. Ghost sat beside him, black overlay catching the flashlight beam, amber eyes calm and sure, as if this outcome had never been in doubt. By morning, the city woke to a different story. Ryan walked into Duluth City Hall with the box tucked under his arm, boots echoing against marble floors polished by generations of civic worry. Clerks paused, heads turned. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting into dark patches on his uninterrupted digital camouflage uniform. He didn't soften it with a coat. He had learned that honesty didn't need dressing up. At the counter, he laid the documents out carefully, one by one, like evidence on an operating table. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and graying hair pulled into a bun, leaned forward, recognition dawning as she scanned dates and seals. Phones rang. A supervisor appeared. Within the hour, the bakery's status flipped, licenses reinstated, notices withdrawn. The rumors, once loud, began to collapse under the weight of proof. Outside, the winter light stayed bright and cold, snow glittering like ground glass. The victory was brief. Gavin Kincaid moved fast when cornered. He filed suit that same afternoon, claiming inheritance rights through Trina Collins, whose name he placed front and center as the lawful heir. Trina appeared at his side in the filing, her signature tight and angled, her presence sharp with resentment and fear. Ryan read the notice without expression. Emily slammed her palm on the counter. "He's not even pretending anymore." "He doesn't have to," Ryan replied. "He thinks pressure wins." The hearing was set quickly, expedited under the pretense of public safety. On the morning of the court date, a storm rolled in off Lake Superior, snow falling in bright sheets that turned the courthouse windows into glowing panels of white. Inside, heat hummed and coats dripped meltwater onto tiled floors. Ryan took his seat at the defendant's table, posture straight, hands folded. Ghost waited outside with a volunteer, pacing once and then sitting, eyes trained on the doors as if guarding the threshold of something sacred. Across the room, Gavin Kincaid sat with his legal team. Up close, he was even more precise than he appeared from across the street. Mid-40s, tall, clean-shaven, hair slicked to a mirror shine. His suit was dark charcoal today, his tie a restrained silver. The lines around his mouth were faint but permanent, carved by years of smiling without warmth. Beside him sat Trina, copper hair pulled severe again, her posture rigid, fingers worrying the edge of a leather folder. The judge entered to a rise of bodies and a fall of breath. Judge Eleanor Price was in her early 60s, compact and sharp-eyed, her silver hair cut short, her robe worn like armor. She had the look of someone who had heard every excuse and learned how to tell the difference between desperation and deceit. Proceedings began. Gavin's attorney spoke first, voice smooth, framing the case as a matter of sentiment clouding legality. Ryan listened, unmoving. When it was his turn, he stood and presented the documents from the box. Permits, certificates, receipts. He laid them out with the same methodical calm he'd used under fire, letting the facts speak. The judge leaned forward, reading. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Then came the pivot. Ryan's attorney, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like folded paper, introduced supplemental evidence. Footage from a small security camera installed discreetly by Ethan Miller after the threats escalated. The screen flickered to life. There was the back of the bakery at night, snow falling, a figure slipping into frame, a hand pushing a strip of cloth soaked in accelerant behind the oven. The timestamp glowed. The figure's coat sleeve caught the light. Expensive, tailored. Another clip followed. Invoices traced to a shell company tied to Kincaid Development, payments to inspection consultants, whose names matched the men with gray coats and thin smiles. The room went quiet. Trina's face drained of color. She turned toward Gavin, whispering something sharp and desperate. Gavin's jaw tightened, his smile thinning to a line. The judge watched the footage again, slower this time. When she looked up, her gaze was ice. "Mr. Kincaid," she said evenly, "do you deny this evidence?" Gavin rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor," he began, but his confidence had a crack now, a hairline fracture running through it. Before the judge could speak again, the bailiff called a brief recess to review submissions. In the narrow hallway outside the courtroom, winter light pressed through tall windows. Snow fell in silence, bright and relentless. Ryan stood alone, hands in his pockets, breathing steady. Gavin approached, steps measured. Up close, the man smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something sharper, ambition on the edge of panic. He leaned in, voice low and precise, words honed like a blade meant to cut without leaving a mark. "You might win in there," Gavin whispered. "Paper favors you today. But tell me, can you win the night?" Ryan didn't flinch. He met Gavin's eyes, seeing past the polish to the calculation beneath. "I already did," Ryan said quietly. Gavin's smile returned, brittle and dangerous. The bailiff called them back inside. The judge raised her gavel, the room holding its breath as snow continued to fall beyond the glass, bright and cold, as if the world itself were waiting to see which sound would land first. The night after the court hearing did not arrive gently. It crept in low and watchful, carrying cold that cut sharper than the days before, as if winter itself had decided to test the verdict before accepting it. Snow fell under the streetlights in clean, brilliant sheets, each flake catching moonlight and turning the air into a field of drifting sparks. Harbor Bell Bakery stood awake, its windows glowing warm against the dark, a lone hearth at the edge of Lake Superior. Ryan was inside, sleeves rolled, hands dusted with flour, trying to finish a batch of bread he had started out of habit more than need. Ghost lay near the door, body relaxed but ears angled forward, the dark black overlay along his back stark against the pale floor. He had been restless since dusk, rising every few minutes to sniff the air, returning to his spot only after checking every corner. That restlessness saved them. It began as a smell, faint but wrong, a sharp chemical note slicing through cinnamon and yeast. Ghost stood instantly, a low growl rolling out of his chest. Not loud, not panicked, but absolute. He moved to the back door and scratched once, twice, 3 times, then barked sharply. Ryan dropped the tray. He followed Ghost outside, boots hitting snow just as a flicker of orange reflected in the alley behind the bakery. Someone had soaked cardboard and trash near the service entrance, hoping the cold would slow discovery and the fire would grow unnoticed. It didn't. Ryan shouted, and lights snapped on up and down the street. Doors opened. People came running with buckets, with shovels, with extinguishers pulled from cars. Emily appeared first, hair loose beneath a wool hat, eyes blazing with fury and fear. Pastor Ruth followed close behind, calm even now, directing people into a loose circle around the flame. They stamped it out together, snow hissing as it met heat, steam rising like breath from a wounded thing. When the last ember died, they stood there under the streetlights, breath fogging, shoulders touching, a ring of ordinary people who refused to step back. Ghost sat at Ryan's side, chest out, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the circle until the night yielded nothing more. By morning, the storm had passed. Winter light flooded the city again, bright and cold, as if nothing had happened. The ruling came down just after noon. The judge's decision was final and clean. Ryan Walker was the legal heir. Harbor Bell Bakery was recognized as a protected neighborhood heritage site. Gavin Kincaid was fined heavily, his development permits revoked pending further investigation. The threat that had hung over the street for weeks evaporated in a single stroke. Ryan listened quietly as the news spread, the words washing over him without quite settling. It wasn't triumph he felt. It was release. He changed the sign that afternoon. With Emily's careful lettering and Ruth's steady ladder work, the old board came down. In its place went a simple new one, Harbor Bell Bakery, Promise Loaf always. It caught the sun just right, the letters dark against fresh paint, visible from half a block away. Inside, changes followed that felt less like decisions and more like acknowledgments. Emily received the letter a week later, cream paper, official seal, a culinary scholarship. She cried openly, then laughed through it, hugging Ryan so hard flour puffed off his jacket. "I'll come back," she promised. "I swear." Trina Collins stayed too. She cut her copper hair shorter, traded tailored coats for cardigans, and took over the books with quiet diligence. She spoke less now, listened more. Her sharpness softened into something like humility. Pastor Ruth began hosting a weekly community meal in the bakery after hours. The ovens worked late, bread passed hand to hand, stories traded in low voices. Ryan added one last thing beside the door, a small wooden plaque hung just below the bell, the letters burned into it by a neighbor with a steady hand. "If you are hungry, take a loaf. If you have strength, leave a promise." The bakery breathed easier after that. So did Ryan. Dawn came clear on the final morning of winter's longest stretch. Lake Superior lay still and vast, a sheet of pale rose and silver as the sun lifted itself above the horizon. Snow along the shore reflected the color back into the sky, turning the world briefly gentle. Ryan stood outside the bakery with Ghost beside him. The dog's coat looked almost sculpted in the early light, black overlay sharp against the white ground. Amber eyes soft now, content. Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out Ghost's collar, worn leather polish smoothed by years of service. He knelt and adjusted it carefully, fingers lingering at the buckle. "You kept us here," he murmured. "You heard what I couldn't." Ghost's tail thumped once, slow and sure. Ryan straightened and looked toward the bell. He gave it a gentle push. The silver chime rang out clear and bright, carrying across the quiet street, over the snow, toward the lake. It sounded like blessing, like arrival. Ryan breathed in the cold air, no longer a man passing through. He was the keeper now, of ovens, of promises, of a place that refused to let kindness burn. Beside him, Ghost sat watch, a faithful shadow against the light, guarding the simple, stubborn truth that had carried them both through winter. Some fires are meant to be kept. Sometimes God's greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder from the sky or sudden flashes of light. They arrive quietly, like a small bell ringing in the cold, like warm bread shared with a stranger, like a loyal dog who senses danger before we do. In Ryan's story, we are reminded that God often works through ordinary hands and faithful hearts. A broken man, a faithful dog, a humble bakery, none of them looked like miracles at first. Yet grace moved through them anyway. In our daily lives, we wait for God to change the world, while He waits for us to keep the fire lit, to forgive once more, to help someone without being asked, to stand firm when kindness is threatened. Every time you choose compassion over fear, patience over anger, love over indifference, that bell rings again, seen by God, even if unseen by the world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you felt God's presence in your own life. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us faith is alive, even in the coldest seasons. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He warm your heart when life feels like winter. And may every act of kindness you give echo like a silver bell in His hands.